It was the middle of August 1992, and the heat in Corsicana, Texas, had been sitting at 100 degrees for 11 days straight, without apology. The kind of heat that empties sidewalks by 10 in the morning and turns the air above the asphalt into something you can almost see moving. Corsicana was the county seat of Navarro County, a town of about 22,000 people situated between Dallas and Waco along Interstate 45, old enough to have a courthouse square with a working clock tower. Small enough that the woman at the DMV had gone to high school with your mother. On the evening of August 17, 1992, a 31-year-old woman named Patricia Ann Dewberry finished her shift at the county hospital, where she worked as a medical records clerk, walked to her car in the staff parking lot, and drove away. She was reported missing by her husband the following morning, when he came home from a night shift at the oil equipment plant, and found the house empty and her car gone. Her car was found 3 days later, parked on a county road outside of town, keys still in the ignition, a paper bag from a drive-through still on the passenger seat, the food inside it untouched. That is not a story about a woman who left her life behind. That is a story about a predator who understood the geography of a small Texas city well enough to move through it without being seen, and who then spent 31 years as a neighbor, a churchgoer, a face at the gas station counter, hiding in full view of the community that never stopped asking what happened to Patricia Dewberry. It would take a single DNA match, a Navarro County investigator who kept a file box under his desk for 2 decades, and a science that was still experimental in 1992 to finally give this town its answer. But before we get to any of that, we need to go back to that August evening. Because to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who Patricia was. Corsicana in the early 1990s had the particular texture of a mid-sized Texas town that was half old and half new, and not entirely sure which direction it was heading. The old oil money that had given the town its identity since the Spindletop era had thinned, but the courthouse still stood, and the pecan orchards still ran along the creek bottoms, and the First Baptist and the First Methodist still anchored either end of the same block as they always had. People had lived here for 3 and 4 generations. The phone book was full of the same surnames that had been in the county since before the Civil War. And in that town, Patricia Dewberry was exactly the kind of person who made a place feel like itself. She had grown up in Corsicana, the daughter of a mechanic named Ray, and a school cafeteria cook named Loretta, who made the best pecan pie in the county by general community consensus, and was not modest about it. Patricia had married at 24 to a man named Glenn Dewberry, who worked the plant and coached Little League on weekends, and they had settled into a brick ranch house on the east side of town, with a garden out back and a front porch they used on cool evenings when Texas allowed it. They had a daughter named Melissa, 4 years old in the summer of 1992, who Patricia brought to Loretta's house every morning before her hospital shift, because the childcare situation was what it was, and because Loretta had strong opinions about grandchildren and proximity. Patricia was the kind of person who brought food to neighbors when someone was sick and remembered to ask, a week later, how they were doing. She had a laugh that carried. She had recently signed up for a night class at Navarro College, something in business administration. Because Glenn had said she could run the plant better than the men who did, and Patricia had said she just might someday. That was the life she was building. Specific, warm, full of the ordinary forward motion that belongs to a person with plans. On the evening of August 17th, Patricia clocked out of Navarro County Regional Medical Center at 5:48 p.m. Her supervisor, a woman named Carol Hutchins, saw her in the hallway and mentioned the heat. Patricia said something about stopping for a cold drink on the way home and laughed about it. Carol would replay that conversation many times in the years that followed. At 5:52 p.m., Patricia's car was confirmed leaving the hospital parking lot by a security guard who knew her vehicle, a tan 1989 Oldsmobile Cutlass, and noted nothing unusual. The drive from the hospital to her house on the east side was 11 minutes on a normal day. By 7:30 p.m., Loretta had called the house twice. No answer. By 8:15 p.m., Glenn's sister had stopped by and found the house locked and dark. Glenn was on nights. He had left for the plant at 4 p.m. and would not be home until 6 in the morning. He came home to an empty house. Patricia's daughter Melissa was still at Loretta's, where she had been since morning, because Patricia had never come to pick her up. Glenn called the Corsicana Police Department at 6:24 a.m. on August 18th. Officers took a report and began making calls. By that afternoon, the feeling in the department had shifted from a possible misunderstanding to something no one wanted to say out loud. Patricia Dewberry did not leave her 4-year-old daughter overnight without calling. She did not leave without her purse, which was found in the bedroom closet exactly where Glenn said she kept it. She did not leave without a word to anyone. Her car was found on August 20th on a Kalish County road off Farm to Market 709, 7 miles east of the courthouse square. Keys in the ignition. A paper bag from a Dairy Queen on the passenger seat. The burger inside it had never been unwrapped. The Navarro County Sheriff's Office secured the scene and called in the Texas Rangers. Rangers investigator Thomas Garvey arrived in Corsicana on August 21st. He was 44 years old, a former Waco PD detective who had transferred to the Rangers Division 2 years earlier. A quiet man who was known among colleagues for the particular and unfashionable habit of writing everything down in longhand before typing anything. He stood at the county road where Patricia's car had been found and wrote 3 pages of notes before he drove back into town. Patricia's remains were discovered 6 weeks later, on October 3, 1992, by a landowner clearing brush on a property off FM 709, less than 2 miles from where her car had been left. The scene was processed by the Rangers and the Navarro County Medical Examiner. Biological evidence was recovered, carefully documented, sealed, and submitted to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab, including hair fiber, including biological material carrying DNA. The year was 1992. The National DNA database was not yet operational. The evidence went into the DP's cold storage system. The case went to Ranger Garvey, and Garvey began the work. He started with Patricia's world, her co-workers at the hospital, who described a woman without enemies and with a fixed routine, her neighbors, who had seen nothing unusual on the 17th. Her husband Glenn, whose plant records confirmed a full night shift with multiple witness confirmations. He was not a suspect by the end of the first week, and Garvey said so plainly to the family. He widened to acquaintances, clients of the medical records office, anyone who might have had reason to know her schedule or her route home. One name came up twice from 2 separate sources, a man named Douglas Pruitt, 34 years old, who had done maintenance and repair work at the hospital the previous spring, and who, according to a hospital administrator, had been spoken to informally by a supervisor about what the administrator described as inappropriate attention toward female staff. Pruitt was interviewed in September 1992. He was cooperative. He said he had been at a family dinner in Ennis on the evening of August 17th, confirmed by his mother and a brother-in-law. Garvey noted in his report that the alibi came from family members only, no independent confirmation, and that Pruitt had provided it in detail before being asked for specifics, which Garvey found worth noting. But family alibi in 1992, without physical evidence to contradict it, was not sufficient to move toward a charge. The interview ended. Pruitt went back to his life. What Garvey could not have known, what no investigator in 1992 could have known, was that Douglas Pruitt's DNA had never been taken, had never entered any system, and that the evidence sitting in the DPS lab in Austin contained every answer the case needed. It simply needed technology that didn't exist yet to ask the question. Garvey briefed the Dewberry family in November 1992, 2 months after Patricia's remains were found. Glenn sat across from him with Loretta beside him, and Garvey told them what was true, that the evidence was preserved, that the investigation was ongoing, and that the science being developed in forensic labs across the country would, one day, be capable of identifying the person who had done this. Loretta asked him how long that would take. Garvey said he honestly did not know. Glenn said nothing. Melissa, 4 years old and sitting in the waiting room outside with Glenn's sister, did not know what was being discussed. She would spend years finding out, piece by piece, the way children of murdered parents always do. The case went cold in the winter of 1993. It remained assigned to Garvey's desk. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to Patricia. The years that followed built on one another in the way that grief years do, each one arriving with the same anniversaries, the same August heat, the same courthouse clock chiming on the square. By 1997, 5 years after Patricia's death, Glenn had remarried, a quiet and careful decision that Loretta had eventually come to peace with. Melissa was 9 years old and beginning to understand, in the specific way that 9-year-olds understand difficult things, that the woman in the photographs her grandmother kept on the mantel was not coming back, and that the absence she felt was permanent. Loretta kept those photographs dusted and lit. She kept Patricia's recipe box in the kitchen drawer. She made the pecan pie every Thanksgiving and set the recipe card beside the dish, and did not explain to anyone why she did it that way. Ranger Thomas Garvey submitted the Dewberry evidence to the newly operational CODIS National Database in 1998. No match. He submitted again in 2003 following a system expansion. No match. He transferred to administrative duty in 2005 and retired in 2007 after 31 years in law enforcement. He kept his personal notes on the Dewberry case in a box under his home office desk. He called the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit once a year, every August, to check on status. They knew his name before he had to give it. By 2000, 8 years after Patricia's death, the hospital where she had worked had expanded and renovated. The old staff parking lot repaved and restriped. The security booth, where the guard had noted her leaving at 5:52 p.m., replaced by an automated card reader. The physical geography of the last place anyone had confirmed seeing Patricia alive had been quietly erased by time and institutional progress. But the case file at the Rangers Division was exactly as Garvey had left it. The evidence in the DPS lab in Austin was exactly where it had been in October 1992. Some things are more patient than parking lots. By 2004, 12 years after the crime, Douglas Pruitt had moved to Waxahachie, 40 miles north in Ellis County. He had married, had 2 children, and was working as a facilities manager for a school district. He attended a Baptist church. He coached his son's baseball team one season. He was, to everyone around him, a steady and unremarkable man. People in Waxahachie would later describe him the same way people always describe people like him. Quiet, dependable, no trouble to anyone. That is always the description. It was never the whole truth. By 2010, 18 years after Patricia Dewberry drove away from the hospital parking lot and never reached home, Melissa Dewberry was 22 years old, living in Dallas and studying to become a nurse. She had chosen nursing, she told her grandmother, because her mother had worked in a hospital, and she wanted to be somewhere her mother had been. Loretta had cried at that, and then pretended she hadn't. Melissa kept her mother's photograph on her desk. She had once told a roommate that she thought about her mother most in August, and the roommate had nodded and not asked why, because sometimes the right thing is to not ask why. Melissa had not explained that August in Texas has a particular quality of heat and light that she could not separate from a tan Oldsmobile and an untouched paper bag, and a little girl who waited all day at her grandmother's house for a mother who never came. The CODIS database returned no match in 2015. It returned no match in 2018. Ranger Garvey called in August of both years and gave his name before he had to. But in 2021, the Texas Rangers Cold Case Division expanded its partnership with Investigative Genetic Genealogy Services. The Dewberry file was selected for review based on the strength and preservation of its biological evidence. A forensic genealogist named Marcus Webb was assigned the analysis. He worked the public ancestry databases for 11 weeks, tracing genetic relatives of the unknown contributor, cousins spread across Central Texas and East Texas, family clusters in Navarro and Ellis and Henderson counties, mapping backward, generation by generation, ruling out branches, narrowing toward a single point. In February 2023, Webb called the Rangers Cold Case Coordinator with a name. Investigators cross-referenced that name against every detail in the original 1992 file. Douglas Pruitt, now 64 years old, living in Waxahachie. He had done maintenance work at Navarro County Regional Medical Center in the spring of 1992. He had been interviewed by Thomas Garvey in September 1992. His family alibi had held because no physical evidence existed in 1992 to contradict it. The physical evidence now existed to do exactly that. Investigators established surveillance. In March 2023, they documented Pruitt discarding a disposable coffee cup at a gas station outside Waxahachie during a routine morning stop. A Rangers investigator retrieved the cup from the trash that same hour. The DPS lab ran the comparison. It was a match. Douglas Pruitt's DNA matched the biological evidence recovered in October 1992 from the scene where Patricia Ann Dewberry was found, less than 2 miles from a county road where her car sat with an untouched Dairy Queen bag on the passenger seat. 31 years. He had built 31 years of ordinary life. The marriage, the children, the church pew, the baseball coaching, the facilities job. While Patricia Dewberry's 4-year-old daughter grew up without a mother, and Loretta kept the recipe card beside the pie dish every Thanksgiving, and a retired Texas Ranger called the Cold Case Unit every August, and gave his name before he had to. On April 4, 2023, Texas Rangers and Ellis County deputies arrived at Douglas Pruitt's home in Waxahachie at 6:50 in the morning. His wife answered the door. Pruitt appeared behind her from the kitchen, still holding a coffee mug. He looked at the badges. He looked at the warrant. He set the mug down on the entry table very slowly and deliberately, as though he had always known this morning would arrive eventually. He was taken into custody without resistance. His wife sat down on the porch steps and did not get up for a long time. The news reached Corsicana before noon. It traveled through the hospital where Patricia had worked, through the records department where Carol Hutchins, now retired, heard about it from her daughter over the phone and had to sit down. It traveled through the East Side neighborhood where the brick ranch house had changed hands twice since Glenn moved away. It traveled through Loretta's church and through the courthouse square and through every family in Navarro County that had known the Dewberry name for 31 years and had wondered and had not forgotten. The word people used most was stunned. He had been right there. Waxahachie was 40 miles. He had been 40 miles away for 30 years. He had attended baseball games and church services and ordinary Tuesdays while this town carried the question of what had happened to Patricia. And now the town had its answer. And the answer was that the person responsible had never really left the geography of the lives he had destroyed. Douglas Pruitt was charged with first-degree murder. He entered a not guilty plea at his arraignment in Navarro County and was held without bond pending trial. Texas prosecutors have indicated that the genetic genealogy evidence, combined with the original 1992 biological evidence and Garvey's documentation of the 1992 interview, forms a comprehensive case. As of the time this video was completed, the matter remains before the courts. Thomas Garvey, 74 years old, received a call from the Rangers' cold case coordinator on the morning of the arrest. He did not speak for a moment when she told him the name. Then he said, "I wrote that name down in September of 1992. She told him she knew. She had read his notes. He said he was going to take a walk. He took one. When he came back inside, he called his wife into the kitchen and told her what had happened, and she held on to him for a while in the way that people hold on to each other when something that has been wrong for a very long time has finally been set right. The box under his home office desk is still there. He will keep it until this is finished." Melissa Dewberry, now 35 years old and working as a registered nurse in Dallas, spoke to reporters outside the Navarro County Courthouse the week of the arrest. She said she had driven down from Dallas that morning through the August heat. It was not August yet. It was April. But Texas had not noticed. And that when she crossed into Navarro County, she had felt something shift. She said she had pulled into the parking lot of the hospital where her mother had worked and sat there for a while before she drove to the courthouse. She said she would have been 62. She had plans. Then she did not say anything else for a moment, and nobody asked her to. Patricia Ann Dewberry was 31 years old. She brought a 4-year-old to her mother's house every morning and stopped for a cold drink on hot evenings and had a laugh that carried across a hospital hallway and had enrolled in a business class because she thought she could do more someday, and was probably right. She was driving home on an August evening in a tan Oldsmobile with a Dairy Queen bag on the seat when someone took all of that from her, deliberately, specifically, and with the intention of never being found. He was almost right. He was right for 31 years. He was not right forever. What does it mean that a man can build a complete life, a marriage, children, a career, a community, on top of an act he committed and then simply walked away from? What does this science, investigative genetic genealogy, say about the limits of concealment in an age where your biological identity is distributed across thousands of distant relatives you will never meet? And what do we owe to the investigators who kept calling every August to give their name before they had to? The people who refused to let the cold years be the final word? Patricia Dewberry waited 31 years. Her family waited with her, one August at a time. Justice came, finally, from a coffee cup outside a Waxahachie gas station and a genealogist who spent 11 weeks building a family tree from the inside out. That is a long way to come for a reckoning, but Patricia Ann Dewberry deserved every mile of it. Justice found Patricia after 31 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, Subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.